Hello and welcome to part 2 in our sessions looking at power, sex, violence and language in South Africa. In this session we look at gender-based violence and the potential of power sharing. In South Africa, 50% of women are affected by domestic violence during their lifespans. Domestic violence refers to abuse, whether physical, sexual, psychological, economic, spiritual, or socio-cultural induced by a man of his female partner, where the dominant male uses this abuse to control the woman and retain her in a state of submission or dependence. Domestic violence can occur in any location and adversely affects all involved. Yet violence against women is silently sanctioned in South Africa, courtesy of patriarchal cultural and social norms that consider male dominance normal. Traditional patriarchal social structures, ideology, ways of thinking, and practices remain the norm, as women's experiences attest, even though in 1994 a new South Africa emerged with a constitution in which freedom is a central principle. Although human, gender, cultural, and religious rights became legalized and racism was outlawed, the rate of gender-based violence and violent crime continues to increase. Gender-based violence is driven by strongly patriarchal social norms and complex intersectional power inequalities, including those of gender, race, class, and sexuality. Gender-based violence remains apparent throughout economic, political, social, and religious societal structures. And this reveals that freedom from racial oppression didn't mean freedom from gender oppression for women. Women are the most vulnerable victims of violent crime, and they bear the brunt of violence induced by economic inequality. Unquestioned male dominance embeds violence in this context. Just institutional discourse must challenge masculinities that endanger women. Patriarchal dictates about women's roles, the norms, so-called norms around femininity, and voices that drive unhealthy ideologies about women require examination. Because dominant norms of patriarchal masculinity increase the risk of violent abuse, such as rape, for all those who do not comply with the dominant system. The South African University of Stellenbosch defines rape culture as the normalization of sexual aggression or sexual victimization due to societal attitudes on gender and sexuality. The associated rape culture behaviors include sexual objectification, victim blaming, and the refusal to acknowledge the harm caused by gender-based violence. Sociocultural rape and violence attitudes, and also patriarchy-based religious attitudes, and thus they contribute to the consequent suffering of victims. There are many Old Testament Bible stories of violence against women. In that socio-historical time, men owned women. You've all heard or read those Old Testament stories about violence against women. Men had power over women and often treated them badly. I define power over, within today's contemporary context here in South Africa, as disrespectful, dominant, controlling power which is used to subjugate the autonomy, the dignity, and the gifting of people of all genders, races, classes, and cultural groupings. It stands in contrast to positive, altruistic, and respectfully empowering acceptance and inclusion of all people and their individual gifting. That is, namely, gender fulsome inclusion, which is believed to facilitate and enrich healthy, egalitarian society and non-violent social praxis. The New Testament brings Jesus Christ, God's Son, into the picture as the second person of the Holy Trinity. Jesus came to redeem humanity. Stories about Jesus in the New Testament speak about Jesus respecting, acknowledging, and including women, even within that patriarchal, socio-historical time frame. Jesus lived in that patriarchal, socio-historic culture, and yet he managed to model egalitarian and respectful gender relationships. Jesus protected the woman who was caught in adultery, whom society wanted to stone to death. The woman could not have committed adultery without a man being present, but in the story the woman was blamed for being the seductress. This line of thinking remains with us today. Women are regularly accused of tempting men. Women respond to this accusation with the phrase, "Don't tell me what to wear, teach the boys not to stare." However rude or upsetting staring may be, it seems that men often take staring to a far more dangerous and violent level of behavior. This is because some men seem to find a woman's revealing clothing synonymous with an open invitation to take advantage of her sexually without first asking and taking seriously what the woman in question was or was not intending. All people are to be held responsible when failing to exercise self-control in respect of how they treat other people. People who exert any form of power advantage over others are to be held even more accountable for abusing this power. Therefore, men who blame women for causing them to behave badly are not taking responsibility for their own behavior. So rereading this story from the perspective of the woman caught in adultery, we may discover new insight. Perhaps adultery was her only form of protest or revolt. She might have endured years of tears as a result of her husband's sexual violence, and maybe she could endure no more. Adultery was perhaps her only means of resisting further marital abuse. Jesus' instruction to her to go your way and sin no more seems to be a very harsh instruction in the light of her circumstances that do not allow her to have recourse to any other means except sin. The woman's sin was probably the only way she could manage to escape from her predicament and gain her liberation. However, Jesus knew all and didn't condemn the woman to death. Jesus prevented her death by stoning and caused her to not become hardened and not to put herself in the way of further harm. The patriarchal social structure of that day failed that woman. Patriarchal social structures today continue to subjugate women to violent living circumstances. Therefore, they are sinful structures. One woman is murdered in South Africa every 3 hours. Only 1 in 4 women report rape, which suggests that they do not trust the law system. This is the statistical evidence that is available today according to Karen Racer of the Advocacy, Policy and Research Office in Wynberg, Cape Town. In another New Testament story, Jesus told us to remember the woman who anointed his feet with perfumed oil, although the men present with Jesus at that time shunned and shamed that very same woman. It seemed that Jesus understood that woman's intention of gratitude, whereas the men present judged her from their hierarchical perspective. The woman was a victim of boys-only banter, where a woman is the joke and object of male derision. And finally, in the last example given here, Jesus entrusted his dear friend Mary Magdalene to share the news of his resurrection with the other fearful believers who were hiding in the upper room. Mary was Jesus' chosen apostle to the other apostles. And just as Jesus told Peter to build his church, Jesus told Mary to speak and announce the news that Christ had risen. Both Peter and Mary were given apostolic commissioning from the mouth of Jesus, and this apostolic tradition remains valid today. Jesus had a non-sexist approach to life and to ministry. It isn't Jesus' male-gendered incarnation that it redeems us. It is Jesus' humanity, an attitude of loving kindness and respect for all people that we were and are meant to learn from and emulate. Jesus becoming an incarnate and humane human being is who facilitates and instructs us to become more divine, to become more like Christ, who is the very image of a gender-fulsome God in our values and behaviors. Jesus, as a human being, came to reveal what God's character is truly like. If we think of our all-powerfully good God as a non-violent mother and father who sent Jesus to reveal relational connection with nature and people, and if we change our language to express this clearly, this would certainly change us and also eventually change the society we live in, don't you think? If you found this information helpful, press like and subscribe or follow, and be sure to watch session 3, where we look at the power of language within our social reality.